Good day, everyone. I hope you are doing great. And today we will learn a new lesson in Assessment in Learning 1. And I'd like to begin our lesson with these questions. First, I'd like to ask, when you hear the word assessment, what related concepts come up to your mind? Okay, so some of the students answered they are synonymous with the word tests. Others answered quizzes, exams, activities, tasks, evaluations, judgments, practical exams, also to gather information to measure students' knowledge and skills. So those are the answers by most of the students when they hear the word assessment. Next, what type of assessments have you experienced? So here are the answers most of the students. The types of assessments they experience are quizzes, exams, activities, tasks, assignments, skills demonstrations like dancing, cooking, problem solving, drama, role play, reporting. So those are examples of skills demonstrations, video presentations, multiple choice, matching type, true or false, identification, enumeration, essay, oral participations, written exams, tests, projects, role plays, and rubrics. So these are the different types of assessments answered by the most of the students. So why do teachers conduct assessments in the classroom? So most of the students answered, it serves as a guide for a teacher if his or her students cope up in the topic. Others answered, to determine the students' capabilities, strengths, and weaknesses. Others answered to determine the level of the effectiveness of teaching. Others answered to identify what skills to be improved. Some answered to know the quality of students' work, to identify if the students' work or outputs are exemplary or needs improvement. And lastly, I ask you to identify what are your thoughts about this picture. So, measurement, according to Edward Thorndike, is something that he says that anything that exists at all exists in some quantity. He means that if something exists, therefore we can measure it or quantify it, whether in length, width, height, temperature. Okay, so these are some quantifiable measurements. So in the classroom setting, what are the things that we can measure from our students? We can measure their height, their age, their weight, their temperature, or even their intelligence, their performance, their knowledge, and skills. So in this lesson, we will talk about the 4 terms commonly interchanged: evaluation, assessment, measurement, and test. So lesson 2, the title is Measurement, Assessment, and Evaluation are used to determine the progress and development of the students. A topic from Assessment in Learning 1. So in today's assessment, in the 21st century education, it is different from the traditional education. In the traditional education, assessment comes after the discussion and it is used to measure the students' learning. But in outcomes-based education, it rejects the traditional focus on what the schools provide to the students. Here, assessment become an integral part of the educational progress. It does not only happen after the discussion. Instead, assessment here happens before the instruction, during the instruction, and after the instruction. Assessments here not only used to measure the learning, but also used to identify the gaps of knowledge the students have and to identify what steps that we should do as teachers to fill in that gap. Here, in the OBE, students will not only focus on the content, they will focus on the development and attainment of the learning outcomes. OBE reforms emphasize setting clear standards for observable, measurable outcomes. In OBE, assessment defines for the students what is important to them. So, with the help of assessment, students can identify and will know that they need to continuously assess themselves. They should know the things they have learned and the things they don't know. They would also identify what really counts, what matters to them, and what is meaningful and helpful to them. And prioritizing these lessons, they will spend their time wisely. Okay, so they can do self-assessment. So for example, if they don't know some certain topics in a chapter, they will give more time to these weak areas. So therefore, they will see themselves as learners and teachers of themselves. So they will do assessment on their own, and also they will find a way to learn the topic. With the change of focus in instruction from content to learning outcomes came the need to redefine and clarify the terms used to determine the progress of students towards the attainment of the desired learning outcomes. Here, we will focus on the learning outcomes and we will give assessments to the students. So, ang kaning assessment, we use this time after time, okay, as needed in order to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the students. So this measurement, evaluation, and assessments are very important in the outcomes-based education. However, these terms are commonly interchanged. They might sound the same, but in this lesson, we will differentiate them. So having this picture, we have the tape measure, okay, and we also have the teacher, and you have here the flag. So the tape measure is used to measure length or distance. So in this picture, this symbolizes that the teacher will measure the student's performance with respect to the expected learning outcomes. So here, students will identify whether or not the students have achieved what is expected from them. So we call it as measurement. So when we say measurement, it is different with assessment. Okay? So for example, when we say measure, we identify or assign numerical values to a specific quantity or attribute. So for example, you measure the height of the students. Okay? Another one, if you want to check if the table will fit in through a door, what will you do? You will measure the dimensions of the table. You will not say, I will assess the table, but instead you will say, I will measure the table. Okay? So for example, if you want to identify the distance between CTU Barili and CTU main campus, that means you will not assess the distance, but instead you will measure the distance. So there are tools in measurement. For example, we use tape measure, meter stick, ruler to measure length or distance. Another thing, if we want to measure the weight, we can use the tool called weighing scale. If we want to measure temperature, we will use the thermometer. And if we want to measure students' performance, we will use the tool called test. So in this picture, we have here the start. Then we also have here the targeted learning outcomes. And we have here the teacher measuring the distance between the point of origin and the learning outcome. This line signifies the prior knowledge of the students, whether they have zero knowledge or have little knowledge. Then you conduct your instruction. You teach the students, you give them learning activities, and then you provide assessment all throughout the instruction. And then measure whether or not the students have achieved the learning outcome. So if the students happen to fall in this part, and the third dot, that implies students have little knowledge or does not attain the learning outcomes. So when we say measurement, it is the process of assigning numerical values to the student's performance. Okay? To formally define, measurement is the process of determining or describing the attributes or characteristics of physical objects, generally in terms of quantity. So, in other words, we assign numerical values to a specific quantity. For example, in terms of height, we will use the tool tape measure, and if we want to measure the height of the students, we will assign numerical values. For example, 5'11", 5'8". Okay, so 5 feet and 11 inches, or 5 feet and 6 inches. So the process of assigning values to a quantity is what we call as measurement. So for example, you put a thermometer to the armpit of your student, you measure the temperature, you get the numerical value given by the thermometer. For example, 36.3. Okay. So like in education, we gather data, like for example, performance, and the quantity that will describe the performance can be termed as score. Okay, so for example, 10 over 20. So 10 is the numerical value, okay, that indicates the performance of the students. So measurement, it is a part of educational evaluation process whereby some tools, instruments like tests are used to provide a quantitative description. When we say quantitative, a numerical description of the progress of the students toward the desirable educational goals. So your scores are the numerical data representing your performance. In the field of educational measurement, the quantities like the numerical data and qualities of interest are more abstract and seen and cannot be touched. So when we say abstract and seen and cannot be touched, these are quantities and qualities that cannot be seen and touched. For example, intelligence. You cannot see it, you cannot touch it. The idea is too abstract. Values, attitude, knowledge, skills. These are characteristics of students that cannot be seen or touched. But these quantities and qualities or characteristics can be demonstrated, can be observed, and can be measured through a specific test. So these make measurement process in education more difficult if it is not observable. Okay? It would be easy if it is demonstrated. Next, define test and measurement. So what is the difference of test and measurement? Test is an instrument used to measure. Okay? So for example, tape measure. Tape measure is an instrument to measure length. What else? Thermometer. Thermometer is an instrument to measure temperature. Weighing scale. Weighing scale is an instrument to measure weight. Now here, periodical tests, different types of quizzes, assignments, projects. These are tools or instruments to measure the performance of the students. Okay, so we use tests as a tool for measurement. So to formally define, test may be called as tool, a question, set of questions, an examination like prelim, semifinal, final, periodical test, which are used to measure a particular characteristic of an individual or group of individuals. Test is the form of questioning or measuring tool used to assess the status of one's skill, attitude, and fitness. So again, we need to have the test so that we can conduct measurement, or we need to prepare a test so that we can measure the student's performance. In other words, we cannot measure the student's performance if we will not conduct a test. Okay, so same with measuring temperature. You cannot measure the temperature unless you use the thermometer to test the level of hotness or coldness of a student. So again, there will be no measurement if there are no tests. So a test is a prerequisite in measurement. So there are types of measurement. We have the first, objective measurement, and the subjective measurement. Objective measurement refers to repeated measurements of the same quantity or quality of interest which will produce more or less the same outcome. Example, multiple choice test. Okay, that is considered an objective measurement because you will conduct multiple choice tests to all of your students. Okay, whether or not they would have the same performance or not. So you use the same test instrument, you will use the same multiple choice test to identify the performance of the student. So what makes it objective? Why is it called objective measurement? Because the multiple choice test will provide one correct answer or two or more correct answers. So na siya accurate, clear, valid answer. Okay? So here, we will estimate or approximate the value of the quantity of interest. So for example, facts, true knowledge of the subject matter. Okay? So if there is clear, valid answers, clear, valid, and correct answer or answers, then we will call it objective measurement. Examples are multiple choice, true or false, matching type, enumeration, listing, identification. However, there are measurements that does not have clear or only one answer. We call it as answers or responses that will differ based on judgment, and we call it as subjective measurement. So when we say subjective measurement, if the quality of interest cannot be successfully captured the objective procedure. So for example, the idea of beauty. Okay? So there is no one single correct answer when we score beauty. Okay? You might see someone who is beautiful, but for the others, it's not appealing. Okay? So what are the characteristics that would use subjective measurement? For example, aesthetic appeal of a product. So aesthetic, artistry, or beauty, or the appeal of a product. It might look good for you, but for some, it will not look good. Okay? Projects of the students. Students' performance like drama, dancing, singing, oration. So these performances require subjective measurement, including essay. So how to measure these characteristics? That's why we will use rubrics. We will provide a set of criteria or standards because to eliminate bias, judgment. Okay? So subjective measurement often differ from one assessor to another, even if the same quantity or quality is measured. So for example, choreography. Okay? So choreography is a subjective measurement. Why? Because some judge would say that is a good choreography. Then other judge that is not so good choreography. Okay, so there are performances that can be measured through objectively, and there are characteristics or performances that can be measured subjectively. So when we say quantity of interest, we call it as area of interest, or a part or performance that can be quantified or measured. For example, the level of mathematics performance of grade 7 students in the 4 municipalities of Camotes. So what is your area of interest here? The mathematics performance of all grade 7 students in the 4 municipalities of Camotes. So if you want to measure the level of performance of these students in the 4 municipalities of Camotes, you will use the division achievement test. Okay. So if you want to identify the level of performance of all grade 6 students in the Philippines, you will conduct the National Achievement Test. So the type of test will depend on the scope or the quantity of interest. Next, the measuring indicators, variables, and factors. So there are educational variables. So when we say variable, it came from the word vary or change. Okay? So what are the things that varies or change from one student to the other? Examples are height, because our students have different heights. Weight, because our students have different weights. Age, they have different age. Performance also is considered an educational variable. Attitude is also considered educational variable. Interest, fears, talents, skills, capabilities, these are educational variables. So, educational variable is a measurable characteristic of a student. For example, knowledge. However, variable can be directly measured. Directly measured meaning you can use a specific tool to measure it, like age, height, weight, performance. Okay, so these can be directly measured. Other times, you will characteristics can indirectly be measured. For example, class participation, students' interest, their attitude, their motivation, their belief, and their behavior. So you can do this through observation. Indicators. So if direct measurement is not feasible, meaning not present, okay? That means if direct measurement is absent, if you cannot perform the direct measurement, then you can use other ways, defined as building blocks of educational measurement upon which all other forms of measurement are built. So for example, performance indicators. Construct or factor. These are group variables. So for example, computational skills, reading skills, vocabulary, logic and reasoning, sequence and series, manual dexterity. So if we will group these skills, for example, the mathematical ability factor is composed of computational, logic and reasoning, sequence and series. However, for language ability factor, it is composed by reading skills and vocabulary. And for the psychomotor ability factor, you can say the manual dexterity. So again, when we say measure, that means the process of assigning numerical values to students' characteristics such as performance, age, height, weight, behavior, attitude. Another term that we can associate with this is assessment. Assessment comes after measurement. So assessment comes from the Latin word assedere, which means to sit beside. So when you sit beside your partner, you will know him better because you will have a closer look about his or her personality. You will gather more information about that person. So when we say assessment, it means that you gather information. That means you sit beside and collect data. Okay, that's what we meant by assessment. So when we say I want to assess you, that means I want to collect information from you. So teachers always do assessment. For example, as identifying if the students have completed the requirements. That is an example of assessment. Which students have submitted their assignment. So that is an assessment. So to define, assessment is the process of gathering evidences of students' performance over a period of time to determine learning and mastery of skills. Okay? Assessment could be, an example for this is oral participation. Oral participation can be graded or ungraded. Okay? So assessment can be used for learning, that is to raise questions for the students so that they will construct knowledge. Okay, so interviews, you ask questions to the students, they will give responses to you, and these responses may be graded or not graded. For example, our introductory activity, I ask you a set of questions. So that is an example of assessment because I gather data, I collect information. I want to determine your prior knowledge. Okay? So such evidences of learning can take in the form of tests. So therefore, test is also an instrument for assessment. Interviews, observation, observing the student's behavior, attitude, motivation, interest, skills, okay, characters. So that is a form of assessment because you are just gathering data. Journals, reading the diaries of the students, their journals, their reflection, that is an example of assessment. Written work, oral exam, portfolio, written test or work, presentations, reporting, research paper, essays, and among others are examples of assessment because they are used to gather information from the students. So let us take an example in this picture. Here, the students use various instructional or learning materials. Some students use books with headphones. Some students use laptop. While the teacher facilitates learning as well as assess the students' behavior, whether or not they are motivated with the instructional or learning resources. So this is an example of assessment. So if the teacher just give questions pertaining to lessons to develop higher order thinking skills, then that is assessment. Assessment decisions could substantially improve student performance. Why? Because teachers will give questions to deepen the knowledge of the students. Assessment guide the teachers in enhancing the teaching learning process because the result of the assessment or the responses in the assessment will give the teacher an idea how to improve the strategy. So for example, the teacher asks, do you like the learning material? Yes or no? Okay, why do you like the learning material? Okay, do you like the story? Why do you like the story? Which character is your favorite? Why do you like the character? Okay, so those questions are forms of assessment. And it will help enhance the teaching learning process. Assessment can also assist the policy makers in improving the educational system. So for example, if students perform poorly in computer operations, Therefore, might be the school will provide more laptops, more computers to the students so that they will achieve mastery in operating a computer. At the same time, however, poor assessment procedures could adversely affect the students, teachers, and administrators. So this means that if your assessment is not well crafted, if it is not of good quality, then it will affect your students, teachers, and administrators. If your assessment is too hard to understand or too easy to answer, then it will also affect the students. Assessment of skills is easy. Skills can be practiced and are demonstrable. Okay? That's why we do continuous assessment of the students' skills. We need to give them feedbacks about their performance, their demonstration, their work, their output. Assessment understanding is more complex. A person's knowledge is in a number of ways. We need certain indicators through written description. So here, the result of assessment should be interpreted through written description. So for example, you conduct a test, you measure the student's performance, and then you assess their performance. For example, most of the students got a score below 50%. Okay, so that is your assessment. Or most of the students got scores higher than 50%. So that is your assessment. Most of the students got perfect answers in the exam. So that is an assessment. Let us check your understanding. Explain the line, all tests are forms of assessment, but not all assessments are tests. Okay? So assessment covers a broader range of procedures than testing and include both formal and informal measures. So this means assessments are wider and broader than tests. That's why all tests are form of assessment. So test is a subset of assessment. Assessment is the superset of test. Test is under assessment and it is used to measure students' learning with regards to specific topic or lesson. So all tests will collect the student's performance in the form of numerical values called scores. However, not all assessments are tests. For example, observation. Okay, you are just merely collecting data but not assigning a numerical value. Test is administered after the instruction has taken place and then often involves collecting information in numerical form like scores. So test happens after the discussion, while assessment can be done before the instruction, during the instruction, or even after the instruction. So that means that all tests are forms of assessment, but not all assessments are tests. This means that not all assessments are tests, considering that assessment used before, during, and after the instruction has taken place. Assessment refers to any of the procedures teachers do, which may include pre-assessment, just like what we do a while ago. You answer some questions, but your answers will not be graded. This means that the purpose of that pre-assessment is just to collect information to gather data about your prior knowledge about certain topics or lesson. Interviews. So interviews are conducted just to check the understanding of the students, guide their thoughts, help them construct ideas. Again, these types of questions are assessment for learning. So these are guiding questions helping the students construct their ideas. Administering review questions. So that is not a test, but these are just forms of assessment. This is just to help the students recall important information or concepts. So teacher can assess also the students such that the teacher will identify who are the fast learners and the struggling learners. And if the teacher identifies the struggling learners, the teacher can also find out an alternative way to help the learners. So here are the purposes of assessment in learning. Number 1, to provide feedback to improve learning, to motivate students, to diagnose a student's strengths and weaknesses, to help students develop skills of self-assessment, to provide a profile of what student has learned. So for example, we have here a math teacher while the students answered or some puzzles in an interactive whiteboard. So the students will not, the teacher will not give the answer. Instead, will give questions so that the students will be guided how to answer the particular puzzle, because teachers will not directly give answers, but instead we will guide the students by giving them questions. So another purpose of assessment is for certification. Examples like the board exam. Here, we conduct assessment to pass or fail a student. So, we do summative tests, periodical tests, major exams like prelim, final, semifinal, and midterm to determine the overall learning of the students, to certify the learning of the students, how much they have truly learned about the subject or the topic. So for the best example for this is the licensure examination. So this is to identify if the lab takers really possess the knowledge and skills in the teaching profession. So that means if you pass the licensure exam, you possess the proficiencies, the competencies of a professional teacher. And if you fail the lab exam, that means you lack or you do not possess enough knowledge and skills or proficiency of a professional teacher. So assessment is also conducted to grade or rank a student. So this is to identify the advanced learners and struggling learners. This is to identify the top performing students and the low performing students, and to provide them the necessary remedial classes to those students who are struggling. Another is to license to proceed, to license to practice. So this is the point why we do board exams for teachers, for doctors, for nurses. This is to check if they really possess the knowledge and competencies to practice such profession. Like for example, driving test. So if you want to have or acquire the driver's license, you need to pass the written and the practical exams. to prove that you really are competent and proficient. This is also to avoid errors, accidents in driving. So in teaching, to avoid malpractices. Next, assessment is conducted to select for future courses. So for example, placement assessment. On what skills or talents or capabilities our students possess. So for example, you conduct assessment if whether or not they are qualified or competent to take engineering courses, medicine courses, or education courses. Okay. Also, to predict success in future courses. So this is to identify if the student, which area the students are good. Are they good in math, science, English, PE? Okay. This is also to select for future employment. Okay, this is to check or to assess if the students would be good in their chosen careers. This is to predict success in employment. Another purpose of assessment is to ensure the quality of education, or we call it quality assurance. Here, we conduct assessment to provide feedback to lecturers on student learning. So for example, we conduct student assessment survey. This is to give feedback to the teachers about their instruction, to improve teaching. So here, the feedbacks given by the students will be helpful for the teacher so that the teacher will know on what area should she or he should improve. To evaluate a course strength or weaknesses. What contents that needs to be included in a particular course. To assess the extent to which a program has achieved its aims. This is to identify if the students have achieved the program outcomes. To judge the effectiveness of the learning environment. So this is to identify if we should provide more technologies and resources like computers, laptop, TV, books, internet. To ensure the course is credit-worthy to other institutions and employers. For example, the AACOP accreditation. Okay, so in CPU, the BA-Ed now, the BA-Ed program is at level 3 accredited. Lastly, to monitor the standards over time. This is to check if our standards are of worthy, meaningful of this generation. In other words, we will use the results of assessment to evaluate and improve the instructional design. Another term that we need to emphasize and discuss is the term called evaluation. It originated from the root word value. So when we say evaluate, that means you get the value. You give information regarding the worth, appropriateness, goodness, validity, or legality of something. Here, we will use the assessment's result in evaluation. Evaluation is formally defined as the process of using the measurements gathered in the assessment. So for example, the students has a score of 10 over 10. So that is measurement. You assess, your assessment would be the student has a perfect score, and the evaluation will be the students have excellent or exemplary performance. On the other hand, if the students have attained a score of 2 out of 10, then therefore your assessment would say the student have or has poor performance. Your evaluation would be, that means the students don't have enough knowledge or does not obtain or acquire the necessary knowledge and skills. Here, evaluation is synonymous of making judgment, interpretation, or explanation of the student's performance. Teachers evaluate the information gathered to determine what students know and understand, how far they have progressed, and how fast, and how their scores and progress compare to those other students. Here, you will grade the students or evaluate the students if their performance are poor, average, good, very good, or excellent. So when we say evaluate, that means you judge and interpret the student's performance. This comes after assessment. So therefore, evaluation requires assessment. Evaluation is the process of interpreting the evidence regarding the problems and progress of individuals or students in achieving desirable educational goals and objectives. This is different from measurement and assessment. Take note, measurement is the process of assigning numerical values to the student's performance. Example, assigning scores. Assessment, however, on the other hand, is the process of collecting data or information through tests. Evaluation here is the process of making judgments, interpreting the assessment results with respect to the student's performance and progress. In evaluating the outcome, we should consider the objectives of the educative process and analyze whether the outputs and outcomes satisfy the objectives. So this is the broader sense of or the end point of the evaluation process. So this is also to identify if the outcome are really achieved. If they do not, we need to find the possible reasons for the failure. So evaluation requires assessment, and assessment requires measurement, and in order to conduct the measurement, we need to perform tests. To recap, I'd like to show to you this diagram. Evaluation is much wider than assessment. Assessment is much wider than measurement, and measurement is much wider than test. Test is just a tool to measure the student's knowledge, skills, and performance. Measurement is the process of assigning numerical values to students' performance, like giving them scores. Assessment requires measurement. So assessment is the process of collecting or gathering data or information, just like students' performance, personality, character, interest, motivation, attitude. So not all assessments are measurement. Okay? Assessment results are used for evaluation. Evaluation is the process of making judgments interpreting the assessment results in order to identify and describe the overall student's performance. So I think that would be all for this presentation, and I hope that you're able to differentiate the terms test, measurement, assessment, and evaluation. And to end my presentation, I'd like to share to you a quote. Good teaching is more a giving of right questions than giving of right answers, by Joseph Albers. So thank you again for listening in my discussion.